Economic hitmen, the engineers of global inequality. The world of international finance is a shadowy realm where power operates behind closed doors and the fate of nations is decided in boardrooms far removed from the people they impact. It is within this opaque system that economic hitmen ply their trade, agents of a global elite seeking to maintain their grip on wealth and resources. My journey into this world began in the 1970s, when I was recruited by a prestigious consulting firm, ostensibly to conduct economic forecasts for developing countries. Little did I know that my true role was far more insidious, to identify nations ripe for exploitation and to craft elaborate financial schemes that would indebt them to Western interests. Our targets were often resource-rich countries with the potential for economic growth. These nations, brimming with untapped natural resources, were seen as ripe for exploitation. Their wealth in minerals, oil, and other valuable commodities made them prime candidates for our schemes. We would approach their leaders with promises of prosperity, offering loans for large-scale infrastructure projects. These loans were presented as generous aid, a helping hand from the developed world to the developing. We painted a picture of a bright future, filled with modern highways, bridges, and dams that would transform their economies. These projects, we assured them, would generate wealth, lift their people out of poverty, and propel their nations into the modern age. We spoke of job creation, improved living standards, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The allure of modernization was hard to resist, and many leaders eagerly signed on the dotted line. On the surface, our proposals seemed like a win-win. But beneath the veneer of development assistance lurked a predatory agenda. The fine print of these agreements often contained clauses that were heavily skewed in our favor. These hidden terms ensured that the benefits were disproportionately reaped by us, leaving the host countries with the short end of the stick. The loans we offered came with strings attached, stipulations that ensured the contracts for these projects went to American corporations. This meant that the bulk of the money never left our shores, as it was funneled back to our companies through lucrative contracts. American engineers, workers, and firms dominated the construction sites, ensuring that the profits stayed within our economy. That the profits flowed back to Western banks, further enriching our financial institutions. The money cycle was designed to benefit us, creating a flow of capital that strengthened our economic position while leaving the recipient nations with mounting debts. And that the recipient nations became ensnared in a web of debt they could ill afford to repay. The burden of these debts often led to economic hardship, social unrest, and political instability. Protests erupted as people realized the true cost of the so-called aid. Government officials found themselves in distress, grappling with financial crises that threatened their nation's sovereignty and future. The tactics we employed were varied, but the goal was always the same: to create a system of dependency, to ensure that the economic fate of these nations remained firmly in the hands of their creditors. We were masters of deception, skilled at manipulating data, inflating projections, and downplaying risks to paint a rosy picture that would entice our targets into accepting deals that were ultimately not in their best interests. And if our initial efforts failed, we had other means of persuasion at our disposal, from political pressure and economic sanctions. These were not just empty threats. They were powerful tools that could cripple economies and bring nations to their knees. The mere mention of sanctions could send shockwaves through financial markets, causing panic and uncertainty. Political pressure, on the other hand, could isolate a country, making it a pariah on the global stage. But when these measures proved insufficient, we resorted to more clandestine tactics. Covert operations were meticulously planned and executed, often involving secret agents and shadowy figures operating in the dark corners of the world. These operations were designed to destabilize governments, create chaos, and pave the way for more favorable regimes. And in the most extreme cases, we didn't shy away from the ultimate act of coercion, the threat of assassination. This was the dark underbelly of our mission, a world where morality was a luxury we couldn't afford. The world I inhabited was one of moral compromise, where the pursuit of profit trumped any concern for human welfare. In the gleaming skyscrapers of financial districts, deals were made that would enrich a few while impoverishing many. Businessmen shook hands, sealing agreements that would have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, on the streets below, the homeless and destitute bore the brunt of these decisions. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots was stark and growing. I witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of our actions. The social unrest that erupted in the wake of our interventions was a direct result of the economic hardships we imposed. Political instability became the norm, with riots and protests becoming almost a daily occurrence. Impoverished communities were left to fend for themselves, struggling to survive in a world that had turned its back on them. The crushing poverty that followed in our wake was a testament to the destructive power of our economic imperialism. It was this realization, the growing dissonance between my conscience and my actions, that ultimately led me to break free from this corrupt system. I could no longer ignore the suffering we were causing, the lives we were destroying. I decided to expose the truth about economic hitmen and the dark side of globalization. It was a difficult decision, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it was the only way to make amends for the harm we had done. By shining a light on these practices, I hope to bring about change and prevent others from falling into the same trap. Section 2. The Debt Trap, Shackling Nations to a Predatory System. The debt trap is a cornerstone of economic imperialism, a sophisticated mechanism designed to transfer wealth from developing countries to the coffers of wealthy nations and corporations. It operates on a simple but devastating principle: lure countries into taking on unsustainable levels of debt, then use that debt as leverage to extract concessions and maintain control over their economies. The process typically begins with a grand promise, a vision of accelerated development, fueled by massive infrastructure projects like dams, power plants, and transportation networks. Economic hitmen, armed with slick presentations and manipulated data, descend upon these nations, dangling the carrot of progress before their leaders. They tout the transformative potential of these projects, promising job creation, economic growth, and improved living standards. The allure of such promises can be difficult to resist, particularly for governments eager to demonstrate progress to their citizens and to secure their place on the global stage. What they often fail to grasp, however, are the hidden costs associated with these loans: the onerous interest rates, the short repayment terms, and the complex financial instruments designed to maximize profits for the lenders while minimizing the chances of success for the borrowers. As these projects get underway, costs often balloon beyond initial estimates due to factors like corruption, mismanagement, and the inflated prices charged by the foreign companies awarded the contracts. The recipient nations find themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of borrowing, forced to take on new loans to service existing debts, further sinking them into a quagmire of financial obligation. This cycle begins innocuously enough, with countries seeking financial assistance to develop infrastructure, improve public services, or stabilize their economies. However, the terms of these loans are often stringent, with high interest rates and short repayment periods, making it nearly impossible for these nations to repay without incurring further debt. This is precisely the outcome intended by the architects of the debt trap, a state of perpetual indebtedness that renders these countries subservient to the dictates of their creditors. The creditors, often powerful international financial institutions or wealthy nations, wield significant influence over the economic policies of the debtor countries. This influence extends beyond mere financial control, affecting political and social structures as well. With their economies effectively held hostage, these nations are left with little choice but to accede to the demands of the international financial institutions that now hold their fate in their hands. These demands often include austerity measures, which can lead to severe cutbacks in essential public services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare programs. The impact on the population is devastating, with the most vulnerable segments of society bearing the brunt of these policies. They are pressured to implement policies that favor foreign investors over their own citizens, to privatize state-owned enterprises, to slash social spending, and to deregulate their economies. Privatization often leads to the sale of national assets at bargain prices to foreign corporations, resulting in a loss of national sovereignty and control over critical resources, and to open up their markets to predatory competition. Local businesses, unable to compete with large multinational corporations, often go bankrupt, leading to increased unemployment and economic instability. The promise of economic growth through open markets remains unfulfilled for many, as the benefits are disproportionately reaped by foreign entities. These structural adjustment programs, as they are euphemistically called, often exacerbate poverty, inequality, and social unrest. The social fabric of these nations is torn apart as communities struggle to cope with the harsh realities imposed by these economic policies. Public discontent grows, leading to protests and, in some cases, violent clashes with authorities, further destabilizing these nations and perpetuating the cycle of dependency. The long-term effects are profound, with generations growing up in an environment of economic hardship and limited opportunities. The hope for a better future becomes a distant dream as these countries remain ensnared in the web of debt and dependency, unable to break free from the constraints imposed by their creditors. The debt trap is a powerful tool of neocolonialism, a means of maintaining economic dominance over former colonies long after they have achieved political independence. It is a system that thrives on exploitation, extracting wealth and resources from the developing world and funneling them to the already affluent, widening the gap between rich and poor, and undermining the very foundations of global justice and stability.